Good evening. First tonight, the people from the Northwest who are already in London with many others on their way to pay their final respects to the Queen.
Good evening. There have been poignant scenes in London throughout the day. Crowds lined the streets to watch Her Majesty's coffin go past. Her family walked in steps solemnly behind the cortege as it made its way to Westminster Hall. There, the Queen will lie in state until the day of her funeral.
Meanwhile, in our region, we'll hear from the children in Preston who watched history unfold on the big screen at school. They will surely never forget that.
We'll hear about the Queen's very special relationship with the city of Chester.
How Muslims in Manchester would very much like the new king to come back up north to see them again.
And we hear fond memories of the Queen from some of our region's most senior citizens.
So please stay with us, but we start tonight with our correspondent Leisha McNally reporting on an emotional day for our nation, wherever you happen to be.
A long, long wait, a long way from home. But for people from the Northwest who have travelled to Westminster, this queue is their chance to say goodbye to their Queen, now lying in state in Parliament.
I've come from Warrington because she's been everybody's nan. She's been everybody's great-grandmother, the greatest lady in the world for me.
It's quite a journey and now quite a wait. Why was it so important for you to be here?
Well, for me, I think this is just a really important moment for us as a country and across the Commonwealth and much of the world to reflect on what an extraordinary reign it's been from Queen Elizabeth II for the past 70 years. That's why I wanted to be here, to be a witness to history, but also to pay my own respects.
This family drove through the night from Lancashire.
We saw the vigil up in Edinburgh and we were so moved by it, weren't we? We just thought, regardless of what we think of royalty, to pay our respects to the Queen was really important, and this was an opportunity that just shouldn't be passed by.
Well, I feel like special because not everyone gets the chance to be here, and like if you're part of it's a very big moment.
This big moment began at lunchtime as Elizabeth II left her home of 70 years for the final time. A ceremonial procession along the Mall, a final clap from the watching crowd, and into the ancient vastness of Westminster Hall, Parliament's oldest building, where our region's MPs were among the first invited to pay their respects.
Her commitment at the very beginning was one of a lifetime of service, and that is exactly what she did. Up until 2 days before she passed, she was installing her 15th Prime Minister. And so saying thank you, ma'am, for that lifetime of service is something that is going to be incredibly dear.
Now, as tradition dictates, the Queen will lie in state for the next 4 days, her coffin draped in the royal standard. And as the queue to file past her finally began moving this afternoon, the long wait was bothering no one.
She's given so much to this country for over 70 years, and I think if I could just give a few hours of my time to just wait in a queue and then go past to be able to see her for one last time, I don't see why I couldn't do that, so that's why I've come.
The atmosphere is really nice, actually. I mean, been here since about 1:45 in the morning, and it's been fun. I mean, I don't know a single person here, but we've just bonded over so many things, and everyone's just lovely, as you can see.
And still, the crowds keep coming. The queue already stretching for hundreds of metres across the river from the Houses of Parliament, expected to grow many miles in the days ahead as hundreds of thousands of people come to pay their respects. Caroline Heaven will be one of them, making her way down from Wigan tonight.
I'd have walked over hot coals, I think, to get down there. To learn for the future, you have to go through history and learn from the past, and I think the Queen set us such a good example. And this is part of history, you know, and I could say I've been down to London, I've seen the Queen lying in state, and it's my small part that I want to play.
But making the journey could get increasingly crowded. many choosing to mark the end of this era from our region instead. At Queen's Drive Primary in Preston, they gathered to remember their namesake in the school hall.
Well, it feels kind of unreal because it's really rare that a monarch dies, and it's been so long since one has died, and it's quite impressive that how long the Queen has been reigning for.
But it's quite sad because she's been the longest reigning monarch, and nobody really knows anyone else who's been the Queen or King. The Queen was not just the Queen for us, it was the Queen of the Commonwealth as well.
I lost the children. They were very conscious of the corgis, so they wanted to know who was going to look after the corgis, and little questions like that. So we also talked about obviously the ascension of the King, King Charles III, and also looking forward to the future as well.
And on the River Mersey, the sound of salute. As all working vessels paused to blow their whistle for the late sovereign. Tonight, she lies in state in Parliament, her people passing and pausing for a final farewell. Leisha McNally, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, we're pleased to welcome to the studio someone tonight who is going to those very solemn ceremonies in London as part of her official duties. Diane Hawkins is the Lord Lieutenant of Greater Manchester. Welcome to Granada Reports. What do you think about all those people making all that effort to go to London for this?
I think it's absolutely overwhelming that so many people feel the need to get together and go to London if they possibly can, to share in this enormous event which we knew one day would happen, and it's taken us all by surprise that it actually has. And there's very much this need to be together, to mourn and to grieve and to celebrate and commemorate our fantastic Queen.
Those scenes today, celebrated and commemorated, how moved were you by what you saw?
I thought it was incredibly moving, and especially when people were interviewed and said how long they had travelled to get there. And people travel to go to Edinburgh, of course, as well, and how long they were prepared to wait just in the chance of seeing the coffin of the Queen lying in state.
And what does it mean to you to be a part of both of the huge ceremonies and obviously the funeral on Monday?
Well, it's very humbling and a huge privilege. As Lord Lieutenant, I'm now the King's representative here in the county. So I represent the King within Greater Manchester, but equally by going to London for the lying in state on Friday and the funeral on Monday, I represent all the people of Greater Manchester there in London at those huge symbolic events.
How much do you know about the funeral?
I don't know an awful lot more, but I'm aware that the Queen played a great part in organising what was going to happen in terms of the hymns and the music. Even the hearse that she was met last night at Northolt, that was designed and she knew about that, and it was the first time it was used for a royal funeral. So she had a great hand in that. And I think it will be a very special service, and it will have huge significance to everybody in the country.
Your role has already shifted. Talk about representing, obviously, the King now. What kind of sense do you get of the change that's coming in all of our lives with this?
I think there are a lot of changes. I have to remind myself, because when I was appointed, I was the Queen's representative in the county, and seamlessly I've become the King's representative. And that is going to be very different for everyone. Look at how many people have struggled to remember the words to the national anthem. I think the first time everybody had to sing that, it took a huge feat of memory to remember to get the words right for that first time. And I think there will be changes, but I don't think we should be afraid of change, because with every monarch there are changes. If you think back 70 years, that was the first time the coronation had actually been televised, and that was the monarchy pushing that. Prince Philip really wanted it to be seen so the whole of the country could see it, well, the world could see it. And I think King Charles is going to go in exactly the same way. He will modernise and change the monarchy, and that's not at all anything to be afraid of.
Things never stand still, do they? Lord Lieutenant, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, one of the most memorable recent visits to the region was when the Queen came to Chester.
Yes, she was with the then Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. They were there to open Story House. It was Meghan's first official engagement, and Her Majesty gently guided her through some of the protocol of a royal visit.
And 18 years ago, the Queen was a guest at the wedding of the Duke of Westminster's daughter, Lady Tamara Grosvenor. Her Majesty was pictured outside the cathedral. It was the happiest of days, with the new King and her two grandsons at her side. Sad to think of them today, together again, walking behind their grandmother's coffin.
Our correspondent Anne O'Connor looks at the Queen's and the royal family's long links to Chester.
At Chester Town Hall, the half-mast flag flies in front of the balcony where the Queen and the Duchess of Sussex waved to crowds on their visit in 2017.
3 cheers for Her Majesty the Queen and the Duchess of Sussex. Hip hip!
They'd come to open the city's Story House, a real boon to the new venue.
There's nothing like having a phone call saying the Queen would like to come and give you a seal of approval and open your building. So there's something really special, isn't there, about how a city feels about its place in the world when the Queen comes.
Oh, yay! Chester's town crier is wearing a black armband.
King George V, Charles Dickens, King Charles I,
and listing all those who, like the monarch, have visited the Roman city.
So indeed should you.
He says there are royal links here from the cradle to the grave.
A Chester person might be born in the Countess of Chester Hospital, be christened in the cathedral, named as such by King Henry VIII, and he might go to school in the King's School, or if it's she, in the Queen's School, and learn sport in the King George V Sports Hub. So every aspect of Chester is covered by royalty.
Prince William, now the Prince of Wales, also becomes the Earl of Chester, a title created by the Normans to defend borders.
The city of Chester was always a key crossing point, a key defence point against Welsh tribes or Scottish invaders. And so the Earldom of Chester was set up quite early to protect this northwest frontier.
So Chester can look back to its royal past and forward to a regal future.
So, after 24 years of saying God save the Queen, I am going to have to spend my winter hibernation learning my new script. God save the King!
Anne O'Connor, ITV News, Chester.
Did I go too high for you?
More news now, and an important development following the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel. A £50,000 reward is being offered for information that leads to the conviction of her killer. It's been offered by the chair of the Crime Stoppers charity, Lord Ashcroft. Olivia was shot by a man who burst into her home carrying 2 guns.
Well, meanwhile, Olivia's school friends have been told that they can wear pink nail varnish tomorrow, the day of her funeral. Her classmates have now started term without her, and they'll watch her favourite film tomorrow. Mourners at her funeral have been asked to wear a splash of pink, Olivia's favourite colour.
What's been nice since the children have come back are the memories that they have shared from what they remember of Olivia. And in what has been a sad 3 weeks, that's been really heartening to listen to the memories that the children have shared of her and the staff.
Well, a big question being asked at the moment is what happens to all of the businesses who have worked so hard to earn those famous words, by royal appointment. They include some of our biggest employers like Kellogg's and Heinz.
Well, now they have to reapply for the honour from the King, and one of them is the appropriately named Crown Paints at Darwin in Lancashire. It's there that Claire Hanna is for us tonight. Claire.
Well, Crown Paints has been here in Darwin since 1777. It has had a few names over the years, but it became best known as Crown from the 1940s onwards. It's got a long history with the royal family. The Queen herself visited this very factory back in 1968, and a lot of the people who worked there then, their grandchildren work here now. Now, it does also hold the royal warrant, as you say. This is what we're talking about. It's the royal seal of approval that you will see on so many things in a lot of shops. Now, Crown is one of the longest holders of this. It's had it for more than 70 years. And Katie McLean, the marketing director from Crown, joins us this evening. So Katie, thanks for joining us. Why is this so important for the company to have this seal of approval?
Well, we feel incredibly lucky to have held it for such a long period of time, and we see the warrant not just as a stamp of royal approval and one of heritage and of quality for our products, but perhaps more importantly, it's really helped guide the culture here at Crown. We see ourselves and our employees as a Crown family, and I think it's helped us act with integrity, ensure that we are very professional in the way that we conduct ourselves, but also incredibly compassionate.
So for a company, that's how it impacts you. So, but what does it mean? Because I know when I've seen it, you know, you see it on paint, on oil, on beans. I used to think, does the Queen eat beans on toast for tea like me? Does it mean the palaces are painted with Crown paint?
Yeah, that's exactly what it means. So basically, as a royal warrant holder, it means that we have supplied on an ongoing basis paint to the royal households. That includes the Sandringham estate for us, Windsor, and more recently the exterior of Frogmore Cottage.
For now, you're going to have to reapply, obviously, because we've got the King.
Yeah, of course. So we will be reapplying for the royal warrant for the King. We do expect him to perhaps introduce a few new things around sustainability and around community, which is something that we would absolutely encourage because it's part of Crown's DNA.
Okay, thank you very much, Katie. All fascinating stuff. And on Monday, the factory will be closed, so staff here can pay their respects to the Queen.
Claire, thank you.
Yeah, don't drop that tin. Football will continue to pay its respects to Her Majesty the Queen with more tributes at matches tonight. Players will wear black armbands and a minute's silence will be held along with the national anthem being sung ahead of games.
But God Save the King won't be played before Manchester City's fixture with Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League after UEFA banned it. Our sports correspondent David Chisnell is at the Etihad for us now. David, what's the reason for this?
Well, Manchester City, along with Chelsea and Rangers, had asked European football's governing body if they could play the national anthem ahead of the game tonight, but UEFA came back saying no. In fact, it said that no anthem will be played here tonight, including now the Champions League anthem. Of course, that is normally always played ahead of Champions League games, and it's said that it's doing that to maintain a consistent pre-match ceremony to show respect, as we did last Thursday. Now, that, of course, is referring to Manchester United when they were involved in Europa League action a week ago, when on the day that the Queen died. Well, to show their respect tonight, Manchester City players will be wearing black armbands. There will be a minute's silence ahead of kick-off. And last night at Anfield, well, Liverpool held a period of silence ahead of their European match with Ajax.
So, David, no God Save the King at the Champions League, but it will be sung in the Football League.
Yeah, that's right. UEFA have banned it, but it is and will be sung during championship games and also those in Leagues 1 and League 2. We heard that last night as well, didn't we? And for many people going to those games, it's probably the first time that they will be singing God Save the King. And ahead of Preston and Burnley's game, well, the honour of leading the crowd in singing the national anthem fell to someone who has sung it many times for the Queen, and that is the Salford-born tenor Russell Watson. Well, scenes like these will also be replicated across the Premier League this weekend, as well as the black armbands, the minute silence and also the singing of the national anthem. The Premier League has today asked that fans applaud in the 70th minute to remember Her Majesty's 70-year reign as football continues to pay its respects to the Queen.
David, thank you.
Now, people of different faiths and backgrounds have been talking about how they feel at this moment of change. Many hope the new monarch will be a protector of all faiths.
Yes, staff and volunteers at the Muslim Heritage Centre in Manchester are hoping the new king will come to visit them, as he did once before as the Prince of Wales. Tasha Kachiri reports.
A memorable day for the British Muslim community in Manchester. The then Prince Charles visiting the British Muslim Heritage Centre in 2019. A visit that Sima remembers well and thinks was very important.
And for us as British Muslims, sometimes we don't feel that we're possibly a whole part of the society. We feel that we're a bit on the fringes. So it made me feel personally as a British Muslim, yes, this is our country. and this is our monarchy, and we as British Muslims at least are getting recognised and endorsed and respected at the highest of levels.
Saima and her family have always been proud of their British Muslim heritage. As a child, she attended the Queen's Silver Jubilee celebrations with her parents.
I also took my mother to the Platinum Jubilee this year, my 85-year-old mother. We went and I took 3 of my girls because that was a tradition that had been passed on to me from my parents, and I wanted to pass that tradition on to my children.
While there's been much debate on how people feel about the Queen's death across different communities, Saima believes that we should focus on the person, not the politics.
I cried because the Queen is the Queen. She's been part of my life. The Queen is a grandmother. I have an elderly mother, and she was just a constant there, and she's worked very hard for this country.
Safiq Sadiq led a tour for the then Prince, showing him around the exhibition centre, highlighting the work that British Muslims have done for the country.
He seemed very nice, he seemed genuine, and you could tell he was interested, like genuinely he was interested. He was listening, and he even made some remarks that he was amazed at some of the facts. And he even mentioned in another speech of his that, you know, there's a great debt that the people of Britain owe to Islamic civilization.
Nothing would give me greater pleasure than to run this.
When he left, I said to King Charles, I hope you do visit us again. And he said to me, Insha'Allah, which means in Arabic, God willing. So that took me aback because I was very surprised that he would understand or know how to use that terminology in the correct context, which he did.
Among King Charles III's many titles is Defender of the Faith, a title that many think will grow to Protector of all faiths.
It's everybody. Britain is not just white British. Britain is everybody, and it's different colours, it's different nationalities, and that puts the great in Great Britain.
Tasha Kachiri, ITV News, Manchester.
Yeah, well said. Now, if you think your memories fade as you get older, you haven't met some of the residents of the Formby Manor Care Centre, including Marjorie Hodnett, who is an incredible 108.
It is incredible. And another resident, 98-year-old Ron Barry, can remember the funeral of the Queen's grandfather, George V, in 1936. Anna Yosef went to meet them.
Marjorie's 108. She's now lived under the reign of 5 monarchs. The former teacher believes the life of Queen Elizabeth is a lesson in public service and integrity.
She made a promise and she kept it for the whole of her life. She said she would do all she could, you know, for the good of the people, and she did. And I think that if you make a promise, you must keep it. Even if it becomes difficult sometimes, you've made that promise.
What sort of king do you think King Charles will be?
Very good one. And if he lives to be as old as his mother was, he's got 22 years. So he will be a good king for 22 years, I think. And she'll be a good queen. And the late queen made it known that she wanted Camilla known as the queen. So she is Queen Camilla, and I think they'll be very good together because they love each other and support each other.
98-year-old Kathleen was at the investiture of the then Prince of Wales in 1969 and has fond memories of seeing the late sovereign.
I do remember going to Carnarvon when she made him Prince of Wales, and then he brought him out onto the balcony and we were all waving, and I was just across the road, and that was lovely.
The Queen's always been a reassuring presence in Kathleen's life, and she's feeling her loss.
How should we remember Queen Elizabeth?
Well, she's been so very good and never put a foot wrong at all, has she, in all her reign. And took her to cry now. And it's sad now that she's gone.
98-year-old Ron recalls how the young Princess Elizabeth made a big impression on him.
As a child, as a real child, I had myself being married to the Queen. I didn't know what marriage was then, but I felt that I should be married to the Queen.
Ron also has memories of paying his respects to the late Queen's grandfather in 1936.
I remember watching King George V lying in state. We were to go to his funeral, but the weather was so bad that my father said, no, not in weather like this. And we had to abandon the idea. But I've got fond memories of going up to London and standing outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. And I was always pleased and proud to be in with the crowd.
Audrey's 95. She feels fortunate to have seen the Queen on several occasions.
It's a trophy under the colour when she was riding down the Mall on a horse. I think that was the most memorable time because she looked so marvellous on that horse.
Why do you think it's so important that we have this period of mourning for the Queen?
I think it is very important because she's done an awful lot for this country, hasn't she? The way she's travelled and helped to make us great.
God save our gracious King.
As residents gather to mark the start of a new era, they hold dear the past monarch. Gone but not forgotten. Anna Yosef, ITV News, Formby.
Wonderful memories. Now the weather with Jo.
Hello, a very good evening to you. Some nice spells of sunshine here and there to round things off this evening. The next few days and nights will feel noticeably fresher. Temperatures are down to and below average for the time of year. There could even be a touch of frost here and there, and certainly due to wake up to each morning on the grass. And in one or two spots, a few mist and fog patches developing. Fresher days and some sunshine, with high pressure tending to dominate things as we go towards the weekend. The jet stream just dipping to the south, and that will push a few showers to eastern coasts. But for us in the west of the country, lots of dry weather ahead over the next few days and nights, with some sunshine to look forward to. Could be the best part of the day for some of us this evening. And then as dusk draws in, slightly more cloud perhaps in one or two spots, a northerly breeze, a few shallow mist or fog patches developing here and there before dawn. And temperature-wise, probably dipping to around 8 or 9 Celsius rurally. Last night it got down to 5 degrees, and we'll notice the next few nights will feel just a little bit chillier. Should be dry as we roll into tomorrow, with a breeze along the coast particularly. And the sun times for tomorrow, it's rising at 6:43, setting just before 7:30 tomorrow evening. Tomorrow then, perhaps a misty start where you are, but it should be dry. The sun will get out quite promptly. Winds are falling light inland, but breezy along the coast tomorrow, and into the afternoon we'll pick up slightly more cloud, but it should stay dry for northwest England and the Isle of Man tomorrow afternoon. Temperature-wise, perhaps getting to around 17 degrees, which is just below average for the time of year. It's beginning to feel cooler as we approach the weekend, but staying largely dry as we go into tomorrow night. Looking ahead, Friday, perhaps a cloudy day, but dry and cool. Saturday and Sunday doing quite well. Temperatures on the cool side once more. Winds just dropping out though, so some nice sunshine to look forward to on Saturday in particular. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jo. Finally tonight, we have been very touched by how many of you have shared your memories of the Queen. Steve McGowan says, I've watched nothing else but programmes about our Queen since her passing, and the more I watch, the more I realise what and who she was. Quite simply, an awesome lady I will always respect.
Yeah, thanks to Malcolm Mersel, who lives in Alford near Chester. He says the Queen's coronation was the first time most of us village kids had ever even seen a television set. In our little village hall, they set up a 12-inch television for us kids to watch, and I still remember it so clearly.
Big TV back then. And Lynn says, I remember lining the streets in 1977 for the Silver Jubilee by the Metropolitan Cathedral in Liverpool. I also caught a quick glimpse of the Queen on her final visit to Liverpool outside the town hall.
Please keep your memories coming to us. We really appreciate every one of them. Good night.
Good night.
The Queen lies in state tonight after leaving Buckingham Palace for the final time. horse-drawn gun carriage carried her coffin down the Mall as thousands lined the route to witness a moment in history. The King leading the closest family in the slow procession behind her. The sombre silence of her journey broken by bursts of applause from the crowd. And the queue to pay tribute at Westminster Hall continues to grow. And we are live from Westminster, where the Queen is lying in state tonight for the first of 4 days. Also on the programme, how Queen Elizabeth inspired other royals abroad.
She was incredibly loving and very forthcoming in giving her advice. And for that, I'm eternally grateful.
And when the Queen came to town, Australians look back through the archive at a special royal visit.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale in Westminster.
Good evening from the heart of Westminster, where tonight the Queen is lying in state, the most significant ceremonial event since her death. The streets here fell silent as Her late Majesty's coffin was carried here in a sombre procession led by the King and senior royals, including the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Sussex. Carried on a gun carriage, the casket, draped in the Royal Standard, topped with the imperial state crown, passed through the gates of Buckingham Palace for the last time. She was carried along the Mall and into the Palace of Westminster before being placed inside the historic Westminster Hall, where she will remain until Monday. Now, already the first members of the public have been able to file past and pay their respects. Over the next 4 days, up to 1 million more are set to follow before the state funeral on Monday. Here's James Mates on the Queen's final journey from Buckingham Palace.
At 22 minutes past 2 o'clock, to the music of Beethoven's Funeral March No. 1, Her late Majesty began the final journey from the palace she's called home since she was 10 years old. From the privacy of the palace courtyard, the coffin borne on a gun carriage of the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, draped in the Royal Standard. Atop the coffin, the imperial state crown with which she was crowned back in 1953. From the palace to Admiralty Arch, Whitehall and Parliament Square, ceremonial London bathed in September sunshine, the sort of occasion she loved. Escorting their mother to her lying in state, her 4 children, the King, the Princess Royal, Princes Andrew and Edward, and 3 of her grandsons, the Prince of Wales, Prince Harry and Peter Phillips. Working members of the royal family in military dress, Princes Andrew and Harry in mourning suits with medals. They marched the half a nautical mile from the Victoria Monument to Admiralty Arch, past the statues of her parents, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Impossible not to remember that 25 years ago, these 2 brothers, both young boys, made this same march through London with their father behind the coffin of their mother, Diana, Princess of Wales. Across the open spaces of Horse Guards Parade, where she would troop the colour, sitting side saddle on horseback on her official birthday. And when she couldn't ride anymore, it was still a day she wouldn't miss. Beyond Horse Guards Arch and into Whitehall, the first memorial they pass is the monument to the women of World War II. She was one of them, volunteering as soon as she was old enough, at 18, to serve in the Auxiliary Territorial Service. As they saluted the cenotaph and moved towards Parliament Square, the Queen Consort and the Princess of Wales left the palace by car to join the procession as it reached Westminster Hall. The escort party of 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, guns reversed. The bands of the Grenadier and Scots Guards, instruments shrouded in black. Big Ben tolling every minute. The minute guns of the Royal Artillery in Hyde Park, marking the same time.
Bearer party. 6 paces, outwards, march. Royal salute! Bearer party, prepare, turn.
The Duchess of Sussex, Sophie Countess of Wessex, the Princess of Wales and the Queen Consort waiting for the coffin in Westminster Hall. The choirs of Westminster Abbey and St James's Palace singing Psalm 139, O Lord, thou hast searched me out. The catafalque in the centre of Westminster Hall, where her mother lay in state, here before her 20 years ago.
In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you.
Here for the next 4 days her late Majesty will lie, accompanied day and night by an honour guard around her coffin, receiving the respects and farewells of as many of her former subjects as time and distance will allow.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you.
The Queen's company colour was laid at the foot of the coffin, symbolically the return of the colour to the monarch. The first members of His Majesty's bodyguard of the Honourable Corps of Gentlemen-at-Arms took their places for the first watch. A double tap marked the start of the vigil. At 20-minute intervals, guardsmen, the household cavalry, yeomen of the guard, members of her family will take turns to stand at the 4 corners of the coffin. The royal family left her to the care of the honour guard, returning to Buckingham Palace. And now Westminster Hall was opened to members of the public to file past. Many will have queued overnight Many thousands more will spend the day, even the night ahead, on the streets outside for this one quiet moment in the company of their departed Queen. James Mates, ITV News.
And our royal editor Chris Shipp was watching today's events, as we all were. Remarkable, moving. I mean, superlatives run out of words, really.
Yeah, let me try, if I can, to explain what it was like to be there today, because we were witnessing the Queen leaving that building, Buckingham Palace, for the very last time. A building that's been synonymous with like national celebration. The Queen herself, of course, was there at the end of the Second World War. She marked all of her birthday parades from the balcony, and of course, as we saw most recently, the Jubilee. But this was her last exit from that building, and the air was like heavy with emotion mixed with that sort of military ceremonial splendour that we are so good at in this country. And I don't think people could believe what they were seeing. Here was a coffin on top of a gun carriage with the imperial state crown on the top, and it was glistening in the sun as it came round the Queen Victoria Memorial. I think if you can put two words together like sorrowful and beauty and have them in the same sentence, it would be exactly that. And quite how those members of the royal family managed to maintain their composure when you could hear from one side the minute guns being fired from Hyde Park, and on the other side the bell on top of Big Ben here tolling once every minute. I've absolutely no idea how you maintain that composure. And of course, looking at those pictures of the Duke of Sussex and the new Prince of Wales there, a route that they did many years ago as much younger boys for their mother. So, 38 minutes that walk took, Mary, and I think that is 38 minutes we will be looking at in the future as a moment of history.
That ceremonial really is so overwhelming, isn't it? And now we move on to the queue of people who are waiting to see the casket, who've come to pay their respects.
Yes, and I was looking at the faces of some of those very early mourners who passed the Queen's coffin, sitting as it is tonight high on that purple catafalque inside that great ancient hall here in the Palace of Westminster. People of all faith, people of none, people who made the symbol of the cross, people who bowed their heads, people who bowed more deeply, but just a real mix of people from this country and abroad, all wanted to do the same thing, to say thank you, to pay their respects. Everything that is happening in this past few days has just been quite remarkable.
Indeed it has, Chris. Thank you for the moment. And the procession to Westminster Hall was watched by thousands of mourners. Chris told us along the route, had lined that short route from the palace. Many had waited hours to ensure that they were able to witness a piece of history for themselves. Garrett Vincent heard from some of them.
By the road between the palaces, the people gathered in the morning under the flags and the shade of the trees. Whole families were here.
This is my daughter Millie, son Freddie.
They got here early to see history come past.
I wanted my grandchildren to know that they had a queen when they were very little, and they will probably only ever know a king.
I'm crying for days, and I know that when the gun carriage starts passing, I'll probably be a wreck. Yeah. But it's okay.
We come from a very large family, there's 8 of us, and we all have felt this sort of, it's like a weird emotion keeps coming over you. One minute you're sort of smiling at the memories, and then you're crying because it's a big loss.
All I want to do is see the Queen, see her off. I've seen her a couple of times in person, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's just like, I'm getting emotional.
Shortly after 2 o'clock, a first glimpse of scarlet tunics emerging from the palace gates, and thousands of phones are held aloft. At the end of the Elizabethan age, this is the way to say, I was there. For others, though, this was the moment to remember and to shed those tears.
I mean, how William and Harry were able to do that, I'm sure that evokes so many memories for those boys. It's just how they were able to do that. Unbelievable. So brave, so brave.
There wasn't room for everyone on the Mall, so crowds gathered at Hyde Park to watch the procession on big screens.
She was a good old girl. She's done her bit for this country. She's given so much. I just wanted to give a little something back.
Wherever you caught your glimpse of the crown and the carriage, it was something to be appreciated with those alongside.
Strangers together, 3 separate families. We've just spent time together. We've had a hug. We're sharing all our pictures and our media.
It's so emotional, the whole feeling of being here to witness that. The Queen was just amazing.
The day you saw the Queen's cortege, when the band played and the princes marched in time, a day to remember and to share. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
And it really is amazing because many more people are queuing up right now to see the Queen's lying in the state. The first mourners were allowed inside Westminster Hall at 5 p.m. The last visit will be at 6:30 in the morning on Monday. Monday the 19th, that is, of course. And the queue is already, we're told, 3 miles long, stretching along the south bank of the Thames all the way past Tower Bridge. Emily Morgan spent the day with those waiting to say goodbye.
Thousands of dawns have broken over Westminster, but very few have broken on a day quite like this. Here to witness it, hundreds of people willing to sit through the rainy night to pay their last respects to the Queen.
But I didn't have any sleep. The adrenaline kicks in, I think.
Patricia spent the whole night in the queue. She was saved from sleeping on the wet pavement by a local resident.
He was really kind, like our guardian angel, because it fell down with rain.
She's described you as a guardian angel.
Not at all. The guardian angel of the country is over there.
By mid-morning, those who braved the night were being joined by others, hoping not to queue for so long, from the elderly to the very young, each with their own reasons to come.
This is the only monarch I've known for the whole 10 years of my life. Because this is history, so I just want to kind of just try and be a part of it.
And so did so many others, snaking along the South Bank, undeterred by the wait or the walk. They never stopped joining it.
Pretty much at the back of the queue. You look emotional about this.
Yeah, because she's as old as my mum and her mum. They were all born in the same year. And I think of my mum when I come. But I think she's a wonderful lady.
Huddled round phones, watching the slow passage of the Queen's coffin through London, the mood took a sombre turn.
Is this really bringing it home now?
We hear the steady
Finding it hard?
Yeah.
The ringing of Big Ben.
But I'm glad I'm here.
As minute comes.
This is the right place to be.
And at 5 p.m, they finally moved, taking their own turn to bid farewell to the woman many called grandmother. For the first in the queue, it was worth the wait.
It was an sharp intake of breath, and it was a comfortable feeling because it was quiet and it was subdued lighting.
I say thank you very much to do all of us for us, yeah. Everything that she done for us and for the people in the whole world, yeah.
This will be the scene for the next 4 days now. Miles and miles of people just wanting the chance to say their final goodbyes. Emily Morgan, ITV News in central London.
And so the queues go on, and let's get the latest now. Romilly Weeks is outside Westminster Hall, where people who've already been inside to pay their respects to the late Queen are coming out. And Shihab Khan is with those who are still queuing to go in. Well, first to you, Romilly, what is the atmosphere like there? What are people saying to you?
Well, Mary, we've been treated to some unforgettable sights over the past few days, but I think the images of today will really be seared into our collective memory. The sight of the imperial state crown on top of the coffin, the faces of the king and the princes as they followed it, as the procession traced its way through London to Westminster Hall here, past landmarks so resonant with meaning for the Queen. And we've been talking over the past few days of those who've been queuing for hours, some for days, camping out overnight. But all that discomfort, the memory of the cold and the wet, fell away as they came into Westminster Hall this afternoon and walked very silently, very slowly past the Queen's coffin. And I've been talking to some of those who've done just that, and they said that it was really a moment that took their breath away. It was as though everybody else in the room fell away and it was just them and the Queen. The procession of people, as you can see over the other side of the road, is still moving past. It will file past the Queen's coffin continually, 24 hours, day and night, until the early hours on the day of the Queen's funeral.
Only weeks outside Westminster Great Hall there, thank you. And now let's turn to Shihab Khan, who's in Victoria Gardens, where people are queuing still to pay their respects to the late Queen. And Shihab, people lining up where you are, they don't actually have long to go, do they? They've already been there many hours.
Yeah, absolutely. We are very close to the front of the queue. The people who are around us are moments away from getting that moment with the Queen's coffin. And we've actually got a family with us here, the Sathaven family. There are 4 generations span across these 3 lovely people. They've been waiting here for quite some time. I'm going to speak to Mum Marla first. Why is this such a big moment for you? Why have you decided to come out and wait?
Because the Queen has been part of our family, if you like, for all the time that I've been in England or even before coming here. And my mum was born in the same year as her, so there's a special connection, and my mum was also a fan of the Queen. And I felt that I must come in person and pay my respects for her faithful duty to this country, because I think she hasn't put one step wrong, and she's dedicated her entire life and service until almost the last breath.
And Gary, you're from Canada. How much of a figurehead is the Queen there, and what is it like being here for a moment as significant as this?
I think in Canada, Queen is the way you respect Queen in UK. It's the same over there. And I just can't even believe that I'm here, because I had booked the flight before it happened. And I lived in UK, I studied here, so I'm part of England, and I'm kind of very happy that I'm there to pay the respect on this day.
And Naz, this is of course a really emotional moment for many people. How are you going to feel when you get in there? You're only a few moments away now.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really momentous occasion to be here. She was such a strong matriarch, so I think it's just a privilege to be able to pay respects to her as well. Yeah.
And that is a thing that we've heard several times. We've spoken to dozens of people across the queue. People have been saying that they feel emotional, they feel this is such a big moment. People have been queuing, some since the early hours of the morning. Spoke to someone earlier who said they were willing to wait for 24 hours, 30 hours, however long it took to get that moment, to pay respects to someone who has been a public servant and done so much for the country, as someone told me earlier. There is a real community spirit here, people talking to each other, helping them through this queue, and it will be incredibly emotional for those who've been waiting for so long to get that moment.
It certainly will. Shihab Khan, just at the head of the queue there, thank you so much. So now that the Queen's coffin has been moved to Westminster Hall, let's take a look at what will happen over the next few days. Tomorrow will be the first full day Her late Majesty will lie in state, with members of the public paying their respects. On Friday, the King will complete his tour of the UK nations as he heads to Wales. Sunday will be the last full day of the lying in state, and a minute's silence will be observed across the country at 8 p.m. Then on Monday, the Queen's state funeral will take place at Westminster Abbey, followed by her interment in the King George VI Memorial Chapel at Windsor Castle. It's been an eventful day, to say the least, so let's review what's happened so far. The King and members of the royal family have escorted the Queen's coffin in solemn procession from Buckingham Palace to the Palace of Westminster behind me here. Her Majesty will now lie in state there for 4 full days in Westminster Hall, with members of the public passing by 24 hours a day to pay their respects. Hundreds of thousands of people are expected to do exactly that, and the queue now stretches for miles along the south bank of the Thames. Queen Elizabeth was a monarch who gained respect right across the world during her 70 years on the throne. Even members of other royal families looked to her for advice and inspiration. I was granted some time with Queen Rania of Jordan so that the Jordanian consort could pay tribute to our late Queen.
Hi Mary, how are you?
I'm very well.
It's lovely to meet you.
And you too.
Thank you for
Thank you very much. Now, Your Majesty, I know you met the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh on several occasions. What would be your abiding memory of Queen Elizabeth II?
You know, I will always remember her. I will always remember her absolute devotion and discipline, and her dedication to her people and her country. In my eyes, she is public service personified. She gave herself entirely to her work and never wavered in carrying out her royal duties. Even at a time like when you're in your 70s, 80s or 90s, you know, people kind of would expect for you to cut back a little bit, or, you know, you'd be forgiven if you cut yourself some slack, but she never took any shortcuts. I think for many generations now, she's really demonstrated what it means to be queen. And for all of us, you know, I think she set that bar really high.
It is amazing when you look at the old black and white footage of the Queen at her coronation and you see it today. It's an incredible passage of time, so much
It's
has
incredible,
changed.
yeah. I mean, I think that just adds to the aura and the respect that we have for her, that she has endured so much, has seen so much, has experienced so much over her life, that it's actually hard to believe that one person could have been exposed to so much in one lifetime.
What were your impressions of our Queen when you met her?
Well, you know, you can't help but feel when Her Majesty walks in a room, you can't help but feel like a swell of affection and respect. She carries herself with such grace and such purpose. She really, her warm smile, her endearing mannerisms, her kind words, all those qualities complement a real strength in character. And even though my meetings with her were quite rare, I think it makes the conversations all the more meaningful. So I always found it moving how she spoke of her memories of the late King Hussein, my late father-in-law. He and Her Majesty ascended to the throne within months of each other, and I think they always shared that bond of that common journey that they embarked on. And it just always made me very proud to know of the love and respect and admiration that they held for each other, because hearing it from her, she knew him in an entirely different capacity than I ever did. So her perspective was always very, very interesting to me.
We were looking at some footage of you together with her.
Yes.
And you and Her Majesty the Queen are chatting. You seem to find so much in common.
Well, you know, I really respected her experience, so I turned to her for advice. And I was asking her questions about, you know, things that relate to my life as well, just to try to, you know, learn from and benefit from her wisdom and her experience. And she was incredibly warm and forthcoming and generous with her advice. You know, she gave me a lot of guidance, just even small tips, you know, how you find the time to balance between your public duties and your personal life, and you know, how you keep yourself sort of strong in the face of a lot of challenges. She was incredibly loving and very forthcoming in giving her advice. And for that, I'm eternally grateful.
Just from a personal point of view, what did you find in common with her?
Well, you know, like I said, she was somebody that I've always looked up to, and you're always nervous meeting the Queen for the first time, but like I said, she has a very gentle way of disarming you. She was a treasure of a person, and I think there were times when maybe she wasn't appreciated as much as she should have been. But I think now, when people look at the totality of her life and what she represented, I think it's very hard not to really appreciate everything that she was. And the symbolism of who she was is something that's going to endure for many, many generations to come, I believe.
Your Majesty, Queen Rania, thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, the historian and broadcaster Jonathan Dimbleby is with me now. And as we heard Queen Rania say of Her Majesty the Queen, she was duty and public service personified. Your thoughts?
Well, that summed it up. The Jordanian royal family has, as it happens, been very close to the British royal family for a long, long time. I think there might be a lot of other people watching it around the world who would look with envy at the ability that she had to be in the role that she had here, and envious perhaps. And it's not surprising that we've got this enormous number of heads of state and other leaders from around the world coming to pay homage to her, because it was a very remarkable life. Whatever your views about the monarchy, whatever you think about anything, it was astonishing.
And today has been astonishing, hasn't it?
It's been a very powerful day. I mean, when I saw the gun carriage coming out of the palace and the black horses, the jingle, slight jingle of their furniture, as it were, the hooves and the drum in the background, Big Ben, and an occasional sound from Hyde Park of the guns firing. It was, well, it completely broke me up, actually, to be honest, and I think it probably did a lot of other people, because it said, I'm afraid, it said, this is the finality, this is death. And then it's particularly moving to watch the new king and his family, grief etched on their faces as they marched that slow march all the way down the Mall. And you look across at the faces of the people there, also filled with sorrow and with grief, and it almost clapping uncertainly. Normally, coronation, great crowds there celebrating with joy. Here, real intense sorrow, but wanting to say something. So you had bleak faces, tears sometimes, and clapping at the same time. When the bearers put the coffin onto the catafalque, you are fingers crossed for them. Of course, they've practiced, but one small mistake, there weren't any mistakes. It's so beautifully choreographed. And the service, so simple. You don't have to have faith to be reassured and comforted by words like that, expressed like that by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Dean of Westminster. And then after that, I've been looking at and talking to one or two of the crowd who are walking, as we know, and as you've been showing, all the way across Lambeth Bridge and along, very slowly, very, very quietly, not as if going into a theatre or a football match, no rush, just steady, steady, steady in the mood. And you look at that and we're always asking us, why? What's the answer to the question? Why? It's not easy. You can give a psychological answer, but you can't. Each individual has their own reasons, their own grief, perhaps, in their own memories, their own sense of awe at this was the Queen, their sense of history, the feeling that she was there in troubled times and she's lived through troubled times with them. Perhaps an understanding of the Constitution or a feeling for the Constitution. None of us spend our life thinking about the arcane character of our Constitution. What we do respect is the rule of law, and we respect the principles, I stress, of parliamentary democracy. And I think that that's in the DNA of people, even if they aren't thinking about it. And I think, therefore, there's a kind of unity of spirit that binds people together, a rock, decency, the qualities that no one can but admire. And I think that's a very powerful expression that is being given here, as for hours people are going to queue in order to walk round the coffin, which is set exactly as it was for her father, George VI, which of course was not televised. It's one of the wonders of this. It was on the radio, and when you heard the images, they are exactly like these images. The catafalque, the coffin, the silent people walking round. And that is the history of it. But its very current importance is not to be underestimated.
Yes, it's extremely moving. You and I have welled up on several occasions already, haven't we? Jonathan, thank you very much. And we will return to that story, of course. But right now, let's move on to some other stories making the day's news now. And food prices are rising at their fastest levels for 14 years. The latest inflation figures showed August's increases were slightly down on July's. That's thanks to falling fuel prices. But the cost of staples like milk, cheese and eggs continues to rocket. And that has prompted very real fears of the impact on the poorest. Here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
Bread, eggs, milk, butter, all the basics are still going up. In Herne Bay in Kent, Emma is appealing to friends and neighbours to help keep her cafe open. But at the same time, she can see how much her customers are struggling.
So many of my customers are coming in and it is literally they're not putting their heating on or they are not eating. I am giving some customers sandwiches to eat because it's ridiculous.
A support package for businesses is still being finalised by the government with details due next week. Falling petrol and diesel prices mean overall inflation eased slightly from 10.1% last month to 9.9%. But food prices are still rising. Basics like low-fat milk up 40% year on year, eggs up by 18.5%, bread up almost 13%.
It's very likely those on the lowest incomes have the biggest hit. I mean, it starts from the fact that it's staple food goods that are going up the most. Bread and milk are all rising. Of course, the energy impact and the impact of energy price rises is disproportionate for those on the lowest incomes.
In order to get the energy price cap through Parliament, which is currently suspended until after the Queen's funeral, the government is considering adding extra sitting days to the autumn timetable. And economists say the energy price cap should limit the worst of the overall price rises.
That brings down the peak of inflation this autumn from 13% plus to probably nearer 11, depending on what else is going on. So it's a really significant intervention.
But although energy prices will be capped, that's only after the next increase. And food banks like this one in Glasgow are seeing more distress.
Their benefits just aren't stretching, and they have no gas or electricity. So seen as sometimes giving out emergency food aid bags and they're bringing them back in and saying, can you cook that?
And customers are coming more often.
Well, once a week, quite often.
And you're noticing the prices going up and up?
Up every week. The prices are always going up every week. There's something different, especially the milk.
High inflation doesn't mean a cost of living crisis is on the way. It means it's already here. Carl Dinnan, ITV News.
And for more help with soaring costs, you can head to our website, and there you'll find advice on dealing with the cost of living crisis, including on how to cope with rising energy prices. Moving on to some other news now, and a £50,000 reward is being offered by Crime Stoppers for information in the search for the killer of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel in Liverpool. Olivia was fatally shot last month after a gunman chased another man into her home in Dovecot. Earlier this week, Merseyside police searched the West Derby Golf Club for 2 guns used in the attack. Also in Liverpool, 3 men have been arrested on suspicion of murdering 28-year-old Ashley Dale, who was shot in the garden of her home last month. 8 arrests have so far been made in relation to the investigation. And the end of the COVID pandemic is in sight. That's according to the World Health Organization, which has said that weekly deaths from the virus around the world are at their lowest levels since March 2020, the month the UK first went into lockdown. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has visited a key recaptured city in the northeast of his country and praised the efforts and sacrifices of his troops. The counterattack against the invading Russians has seen Ukraine's armed forces retake large areas of their homeland in recent days. The area highlighted in blue here shows the land occupied by Ukrainian forces almost a week ago. This is how much they hold now, with the president vowing his country's flag would fly again over every occupied city and village. Here's Robert Moore with the latest.
Volodymyr Zelensky came to see for himself his battered and newly liberated lands in the Kharkiv region. The Ukrainian president told his troops that all of the country will be freed from the Russian occupation. And he took part in ceremonies that saw his nation's flag raised over towns that were, until just days ago, brutalized by the Russian military. The collapse of the Russian front has been startling, hinting at desperately poor morale. An extraordinary amount of equipment has been abandoned. Under one rug, mortar shells. And beside the road, vehicles and weaponry simply jettisoned in the face of the rapid Ukrainian advance. But from Western leaders, some caution.
Mr. President, is this a turning point in the war in Ukraine?
President Biden made clear that difficult days still lie ahead.
The question is unanswerable right now. It's hard to tell. It's clear the Ukrainians have made significant progress. I think it's going to be a long haul.
In Brussels, with Zelensky's wife watching on, the president of the Commission made clear this is not a conflict about distant territory.
This is also a war on our energy. It's a war on our economy. It's a war on our values. It is a war on our future. It is about autocracy against democracy. And I stand here with a conviction that with the necessary courage and with the necessary solidarity, Putin will fail and Ukraine and Europe will prevail.
The hardship in eastern and southern Ukraine remains acute. Food distribution has begun again in places, but distraught faces tell the story of continuing need as a harsh winter approaches. Ukrainians are certainly the beneficiaries now of those abandoned Russian military supplies. Even tanks are being towed away, a symbol of the rapidly changing fortunes of war. Robert Moore, ITV News.
Let's return to events here now, and Commonwealth leaders will start arriving in the UK for the Queen's state funeral on Monday. Many may be contemplating their country's future relationship with the new king. Barbados became the world's newest republic last year, with the then Prince of Wales taking part in the ceremonial end of the monarchy there. The Caribbean islands still wants close ties with the UK, but as Ian Woods reports from Barbados, others may well follow their path.
Saturday morning. This is the Calypso King of Barbados. He's met and played for royalty, but he's definitely not a monarchist. Even so, the singer known as the Mighty Gabby was mightily impressed by King Charles.
His dialogue, his monologue, his language, right? The tone of it says that he himself is seeing something different or wants to see something different.
The occasion was when Barbados bade farewell to the crown. Last November it became a republic, and as it looked to the future king spoke of its painful history.
The darkest days of our past and the appalling atrocity of slavery, which forever stains our history.
Those words convinced some that the new monarch still has a role to play here, even though Barbados no longer pledges allegiance to the crown.
His presence showed that even though Barbados is a republic, and even though we're taking care of our own affairs, we still have a lot of respect for the monarchy.
It's nothing personal.
The island's leading barrister, Sir Trevor Carmichael, became a friend of Prince Philip, but says the transition to a republic was well handled.
The change was inevitable, and I think most people recognise that. The reason that it didn't happen wasn't because of dilatoriness. It was just an effort to ensure that we got it right and that it didn't appear as if we were just behaving like an ill-tempered schoolboy.
And maybe it was only a matter of time before Barbadians decided they no longer needed a 200-year-old statue of Horatio Nelson in their main square. It was removed last year after the Black Lives Matter protests. It all adds to the sense that the island, once dubbed Little England, has loosened ties with London. In the local papers, events in the aftermath of the Queen's death are either buried deep in the inside pages or not mentioned at all. And up there, on the Parliament building, the flag of Barbados is not flying at half-mast, as it did when Nelson Mandela died. And just like other parts of the Caribbean, much of the investment in the island's infrastructure now comes from China. But if there is a future role for the King as head of the Commonwealth, Gabby would like him to make good on his words about slavery and address the growing calls for those who grew rich from the trade to compensate their descendants.
We must have reparations, Ian. This is not something that we are begging for. We are demanding reparations. And for me, reparations don't mean put enough money in people's pockets or in the government's coffers alone. It means building schools, hospitals, pass on some of the technology to us so that we can ride with you.
The Crown and the government are unlikely to play ball, particularly in the midst of an economic crisis at home. But even as the former colony strikes out on its own, some British traditions will always survive. Ian Woods, ITV News, Barbados.
Let's return to Shihab Khan, who's with some of the many mourners queuing up along London's South Bank. Shihab, they've had a long wait ahead, and still they come.
Yeah, the queue is, from this point, goes back about 2.5 miles, and there are estimations that it is just going to continue to grow and get longer and longer. There are a lot of people working here. More than 700 stewards are on shift at the moment just to marshal it, make sure that it is safe and that it moves in as it does, as you can see behind me, in pulses. So it will move for a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds or so, and then it pauses. There are also 100 volunteers who are all going to be part of that operation. When you join the queue, you get a wristband. It allows you to leave the queue, go to the bathroom if you need to, because, as we've spoken to people, you can be here for several hours. Someone I spoke to earlier had been here since 8 a.m, and there were estimates earlier that the queue could end up being 30 hours or so. So you can actually leave the queue, go to the bathroom, and then return to it. When you get to the front of the queue, there is airport-style security, so there are some restrictions on what you should bring with you. That's why there's guidance saying not to bring a tent, for example, not to bring sharp items, and if you have any food or drink, it needs to be consumed before you get there. Having spoken to people across this queue, and I've been doing it since the morning, people here are incredibly emotional. There's a community spirit. People are sharing food, people are sharing stories. There are people who have met the Queen previously. They're all speaking to each other, and this is a big moment for many people who feel incredibly emotional that someone who has been part of their lives for so long is now no longer with us, and it's an opportunity for them to pay their respects.
Shihab Khan alongside the queue there, thank you. Let's take a look back now at some happier times past, and one of the Queen's first steps after her coronation was to continue her ambitious tour of the Commonwealth that was interrupted when her father died. It was a huge success, taking in countries across the Southern Hemisphere, including Australia. And many of those who saw the royal couple remember it to this day. Dan Rivers heard their memories of when the Queen came to town.
To the shores of this, her southern realm, the royal barge bears Elizabeth II.
It was perhaps the most successful royal tour in history. When the Queen set foot on Australian soil in 1954, she was the first British monarch ever to visit this continent. It's estimated 75% of the Australian population saw her in the flesh.
To watch her step off the boat, I still, in a very pale dress she was wearing, and that's a long while ago for me to remember that. And of course the cheering, and everybody was waving flags, and yeah, it was exciting. And I can even feel it now as I'm talking about it. I can feel that excitement.
During the gruelling 2-month tour, the Queen and Prince Philip visited 57 towns and cities.
We just opened our gates and our hearts at our throats. There was Bathurst, for instance.
Bathurst hasn't changed much since 1954. Among those crowding into this town square was a young Margaret Bower, who got closer than many, sparking a lifelong love of the Queen, with whom she exchanged letters for decades.
So I ran right beside the sports car. I could have put my hand on the Queen because it went slowly, and I went for about 3 blocks, and they went off in the train. Yeah, it was wonderful.
This is how many Australians caught their first glimpse of the new Queen in 1954. This Daimler was state-of-the-art at the time, with this special convertible section at the back to enable the crowds to glimpse the new monarch. This was the moment the Queen arrived in the small town of Lithgow. Colour footage rarely seen of the visit. It was undoubtedly the most exciting event in the town's history. But while most had just a glimpse of the Queen, Janice Marshall had the privilege of presenting a posy because her father had been killed in the war.
I presented her with the bouquet, but I had to turn it round. It had a little handle on the back of it so that she could take it from my hand. And as she did, she squeezed my hand and just in a real soft voice said, "Thank you, Janice." And then I had to take 2 steps to the side and I put my hand out to shake hands with the Duke, and he wasn't watching. And somebody, I suppose it was his minder behind him, said something to him, and he looked down and he sort of went, "Oh," and then he shook my hand. And I'm sure I was the only one that did the best curtsy too.
I'm sure you're right.
There may be a few other little girls who beg to differ.
Of course, she'd rehearsed this for weeks.
But an astonishing number of Australians of a certain age remember the time the Queen came to their hometown. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Bathurst.
Oh, great pictures there. Archive from Australia. I just want to talk a little bit more about that queue. Yeah. It is extraordinary.
You know, it is, and I've just been looking across the road at the queue and thinking about those who are just at the very front. They're quiet, they're patient, they know they're about to enter that great hall here, which sits next to the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and so they will come today, tonight, tomorrow, and every day and night up until dawn on Monday, when they will finally be closed, and heaven knows how they're going to close that queue, but at some point they will have to. And then the coffin will make the start of its final journey across the road here to Westminster Abbey, where the Queen was coronated, where she was also married as well. But I suppose between now and then, Mary, it's not just a queue of members of the public. All of those world leaders, and you spoke earlier in the programme to Queen Rania of Jordan, when they come here for the state funeral, they too will want their moment in that hall. And I was thinking back to what Justin Trudeau said after the Queen had died, that she was one of his favourite people in the world. They'll want to go into the hall as well. So whether you knew the Queen, like Justin Trudeau, or whether you, like all of these people, never met the Queen, people just want to go into that hall and have that quiet moment of contemplation, whether it's for prayer or just a bit of thought. Everyone wants to do the same thing.
You were saying today is about finality, which it is. It's saying goodbye, but it's also all about continuity, isn't it? The next monarch, the new king.
Yes, and how many times have we said over the past few days it's all about continuity of monarchy. Actually, I've just come from Buckingham Palace, where actually right now the Union flag is flying at half-mast. What does that mean? Well, it means the King is no longer there. The Queen has left it for the last time, but the new King is not there. I think most people will agree that he too needs a moment to pause and reflect. He's been leading the nation in mourning, but he's got his own grieving to do as well. So we think he's most likely gone to Highgrove to have a moment to himself with the Queen consort to think about what they've lost on a personal level. And I was also, thinking about all the royal family, including the Duke of Sussex, the new Prince of Wales. It was a very, very emotional day for all of them.
It certainly was, Chris, thank you. And that brings our programme to a close as the Queen nears the end of her final journey. She left Buckingham Palace for the last time this afternoon, with her coffin carried by gun carriage down the Mall. The sombre procession was led by the King and joined by senior royals, including the new Prince of Wales and the Duke of Sussex. As the streets fell silent, the Queen's coffin was taken into Westminster Hall, where she was formally handed over to the people to pay their respects. And already we've seen hundreds file past, already with queues almost 3 miles long. Over the next few days, up to 1 million more could follow to say thanks before her state funeral and then her burial in Windsor. Well, Tom will be hit with news at 10, but from me and all the team here at Westminster, bye-bye.
tomorrow, if a little more breezy than it has been of late. We've got a northerly airflow becoming established as we end the week. A few blustery showers into parts of Scotland, parts of East Anglia. Otherwise, high pressure in control, leaving it so much calmer, drier and brighter as we go into the weekend. And temperatures what you'd expect given the time of year. As for the next few hours, generally speaking dry, a good deal of clear sky, more cloud cover across the east, and it stays very mild across southern counties. Elsewhere, a touch cooler as temperatures slide under the starry skies, particularly through parts of northern England and Scotland. Glens of Scotland seeing as low as 1 or 2 degrees come the first stages of tomorrow morning. A little chilly here to start the new day. The breeze keeping any significant mist and murk at bay. And through tomorrow morning, clear and crisp from the word go for many of us, away from that cloud across eastern locations. Generally a lot of sparkling sunshine and blue sky, just a little fair weather cloud bubbling up through the course of the day, and blustery showers on and off through parts of Scotland, occasionally Northern Ireland and parts of East Anglia as the day wears on. Staying dry for those heading to London, highs of 21, 22 degrees or so. The muggy air gives way to a fresher feel. And out of the breeze, feeling pleasant in the sunshine, but those temperatures a little lower than of late, particularly across the northern half of Britain and Northern Ireland. As for Friday, a very similar scene, bright and breezy, blustery showers into parts of northern Scotland, skimming those eastern coasts of England, particularly through parts of East Anglia and Kent, quite blustery around the coast. A much fresher, cooler day in the breeze, but plenty of sunshine to make
The dreaded school.
It was all right.
There you go. What about that girl, Sophie? You spoken to her yet?
No, but it's whatever.
Look, you know you can talk to me, right?
Actually, Dad, it's just that anytime I go over to her, she doesn't talk to me or she walks away and then something messages.
With strong emotions and difficult conversations some viewers may find upsetting. Here's Emmerdale now on ITV.
How do they keep up with all these affairs? I can barely keep up with